find out. I don't think so. I was messing with the stream key earlier, and I think I have it set to the correct stream key. Sure. Normally people show up there pretty regularly, so I can. But yeah, if you want to check, go for it. Cool. Awesome, Chris. So thanks for taking the time to have a conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time to discuss evidence for God. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started? Cool. So what do you think the evidence is? Oh, wait. Sorry, no sound from the guest message in the chat. All right. Sorry, start over.
Uh-oh.
Tell us about yourself. Now it should be good.
That was on my end. I think I forgot to unmute myself on my own stream too. So yeah, sorry about that, guys. All right. So yeah, I'm a presuppositional apologist. I am Christian. I am Reformed. I believe that there is plenty of good evidence to believe in God. I believe that there is very good reason to believe in God. I'm also a master's student, currently about halfway through my curriculum, master's student in theology, training to be a pastor. So that's where I'm coming from. I believe the evidence to believe in the existence of God is the impossibility of the contrary. That's the reason. I believe it is a very compelling reason. And yeah, in my chat, go ahead and let me know if you guys can hear me now. But what I mean by that is that there are certain things called the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. Intelligibility I define as our ability to make propositions about reality and our ability to have any degree of confidence whatsoever in their truth, in whether or not they actually correspond to reality. I believe that's impossible to do without these necessary preconditions. So I would include in that things like logic, the ability to reconcile and bring together universals and particulars. I would include in that the need for an objective revelation from an all-knowing God. These are just some examples, but each and every one of those things, if they're not in place, then we don't have any confidence. We don't have any justification for knowledge. And so any worldview which does not include those things, its basis for knowledge, the degree of confidence it has is inscrutable. So I'm not claiming necessarily that there is no logic, but I'm claiming that on non-Christian worldviews, there's no ability to look into our basis for knowledge, look into our basis for logic, and make any degree of claims whether there is or isn't good reason to believe that logic is the case. And so it's inscrutable. That's at the basis of all of our knowledge. Because the basis of all of our knowledge, the chances of whether or not it's a case is inscrutable. We don't have any knowledge on non-Christian worldviews. And I believe that any deviation whatsoever from the Christian worldview puts you into that very difficult position.
Okay, how did you gain knowledge of the Christian God that gives you this conditional basis for logic?
Right. So there is a distinction to be made here, I think, between temporal procession and logical procession, and how our beliefs logically flow from one another and how they temporally flow from one another. I believe we can make a distinction there. So neither I nor anyone else that I know claims that we can escape the fact that temporally I had to use my logic in order to ground my logic. Temporally, I can't escape the
I
same
don't care about that.
problems that I level at
I don't
you.
care about that. I'm interested in the revelation thingy. So you're saying a God
Okay.
told you so, that he exists, and he told you that he's the all-powerful,
Hmm.
perfect being, and
Hmm.
that's your basis of knowledge.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so if I said the all-powerful flying spaghetti monster came to me last night and he told me that the Christian God, complete bunk, there's no Jesus, completely fake, didn't even exist in history, and he's all-powerful and all-knowing. I now have divine revelation from the spaghetti monster. Is that a reliable basis of knowledge?
Yeah. So the presuppositionalist method, it does deal with worldviews and their particulars. So if that's a route you want to go down for the debate, we need to really get into what the very finite particulars of that flying spaghetti monster Pastafarian worldview is that you're proposing. Um,
I don't
and
care. None of
so,
the particulars matter here. The question is the fact that I had some emotional experience of some being who claims to have properties, his actual properties make no difference here. If he
sure.
claims to have properties, is that sufficient reason to believe the properties he states are correct?
Yeah. So I would out and out uh, reject that you can just uh, separate aspects of the worldview from the rest of the worldview like that. So
What? I don't understand what you're
so
saying.
so within the flying spaghetti monster worldview, I'm going to
But
grant for the sake.
this isn't about the flying spaghetti monster here. The question here is that you had an experience. You had a what you believe to be an all powerful being gave you an impression or an idea or a feeling of some kind, and you believe it. And
Oh, I see.
yeah, so I'm just parodying that by saying I did that with the spaghetti monster. The spaghetti monster itself
Yeah.
doesn't matter to the argument.
So so for my demonstration of the Christian worldview, I'm when I say objective revelation, I'm talking about codified scripture, the book that I have and everybody else has.
The Bible?
Yeah.
The Bible is your basis of all absolute truth?
Yeah, so revelation from the all-knowing knower. Yeah, and where we have that objectively and not merely internally is in the Bible.
So the talking snakes, talking donkeys, 6 day creation, objective truth.
Yeah, those are all corollaries, but there there's more basic issues that we can discuss here. For example, I wouldn't even grant your ability to on your worldview to discuss those things as logical or illogical until you establish some things within your own worldview. So I want to talk about those foundational issues.
Sure. So my worldview starts with I think, therefore I am, which is pretty
Mm-hmm.
good. So I exist. And that's a significantly better basis than I got a revelational feeling from an all-powerful being who said he's an
Yeah,
all-powerful being.
yeah, you're misstating my worldview. I'm not demonstrating the Christian worldview from I got a revelational feeling. I'm demonstrating it from the content of the revelation that we have from God. All right, so
What does that
that
mean?
that is a basis of our epistemology. So it's not just God has talked to
What do you
me as
mean
an
by
individual.
content of the revelation? Is that like when he gave you a revelation, the feeling you had, is that the content, or do you mean the Bible content?
Yeah, the theological worldview laid out in Scripture.
I don't get it. What is I'm not following the argument here.
Yeah, so it might be helpful if I zoom out a little bit. Would that be okay?
Um I mean
Give a
philosophically?
little bit,
Sure.
yeah, like give a little bit of a wider picture of the worldview in my claim, because I think you're having there's some context here to what I'm saying, and we haven't gone over it yet. And I think that might be where you're having trouble understanding what I'm saying. Um,
Well, I mean, I've talked with many precepts before, so I don't think it's necessarily grease on my wrist. That's nasty. But
yeah,
I think it's more that when we're comparing worldviews, your worldview
okay,
seems to start with this revelation thingy. You need this revelation thingy of some kind, whether it's a feeling or a book of some kind.
yeah.
And
So not feeling or book. the content of the Christian worldview that has been inherently revealed in Scripture. That's a very specific claim, and it doesn't work without that very specific claim.
Okay, so that's the part where I'm getting lost. So you're saying it's not the feeling and it's not the book. It's something. It's a pattern in the book.
No, if I gave you that impression, I mean, it is the book, but specifically, I'm concerned about the worldview that's presented in the book.
Okay.
So I believe that there's a scriptural worldview, and there's a worldview that's presented in the pages of Scripture, and apart from that worldview, we can't account for knowledge. That's the claim.
Okay, so let's say we discover a book on the beach, and it says it's from the all-powerful creator of the universe, and it presents a worldview. What about that book would give us reason to believe it's not just made up by J.R. Rowling?
So are you talking about the Bible, or are you talking about just any book, just non-specific?
Well, the methodology would have to be the same to apply to both, right? Like you'd have to.
Yeah, well, I'm just asking if you're asking about. So are you asking about my confidence in the truth of Scripture?
Sort of. I think it's more that in my epistemology, you need some way to differentiate imagination from reality for it to count as evidence. So if we just came across a book, it could be the Bible, it could be any book, and we're trying to evaluate, is this book real or is this book imaginary? We need some kind of criteria to establish that this is the real book that corresponds to the real ultimate all-powerful being or whatever. And so I want to know what that criteria is that you found in the book that makes it credible rather than just a fairy tale.
Yeah, so the demonstration of my claims is the impossibility of the contrary.
What in the Bible says anything about that?
I don't think my position entails the necessity that the Bible has to specifically talk about the impossibility of the contrary in order for me to utilize that to demonstrate the truth of it.
Okay, still not following. So your worldview is based on the revelation, which is in the Bible. It's something in the Bible. So we're looking for something in the Bible, and we want to know, does this something in the Bible meet some set of criteria? And your criteria is impossibility of the contrary.
Yeah, so that would be how I demonstrate the truth of the scriptural worldview. That's not a criteria that I see in the Bible for establishing truth claims.
So again, I'm trying to say either the Bible is real and the Christian God is true, or it's a fiction made up by goat herders 3,000 to 6,000 years ago. So if we came across a book on the desert and you said, well, it's impossible the book is not true. I mean, obviously that's false. Like I could just pick a sentence and say that sentence is false. There's no logical contradiction to say the world was not created in 6 days. So I can clearly say the Bible is false. That sentence is false. Or just pick random aspects. Jesus never existed. There's no logical contradiction with the idea Jesus never existed. So that there's no logical necessity that he did exist. So saying that it's the impossibility of the contrary would be like saying the Bible itself is a married bachelor, for the Bible to not be in any way wrong would be like a married bachelor or something. It's incoherent. I mean, clearly there's no logical contradiction saying the Bible is wrong.
Yeah. So that's not in and of itself an illogical statement. I agree with that. What I'm trying to say is that any deviation from the Christian worldview no longer yields knowledge. The worldviews fundamentally disagree with each other if they're non-Christian worldviews and are impossible. And that's true of every worldview that is not the Christian worldview. I
think you're skipping a step here. So I'm saying you started with the basis of your belief is revelation, and the revelation is the Bible. Now from there, you need to go from the Bible to something. You can't just skip to say everything else is impossible. Well, anybody could say that. I could say my cup not existing is impossible because it's the impossibility of the contrary. My cup must exist because I said so. So you have to start with your revelation, which leads you to the Bible. And how does the Bible give you this idea that it's impossible that the Bible is wrong?
Well, yeah, that's why I asked if we could zoom out a little bit earlier, and yeah, that's what I wanted to give you, maybe that step, because it's hard to give that step without giving a little bit of a little bit of a monologue. I'm not talking like 10 minutes or anything,
Sure, go
but
for it.
yeah. So my belief is that God knows all things by virtue of his own being. He does not rely upon anything outside of himself for his knowledge. He perfectly knows himself exhaustively and comprehensively. Now, God is the creator of the world, and he controls all things that happen in the world. Every fact that exists because of God, in other words. And so because of that, God knows all facts in reality exhaustively. He knows everything. This is what we call his omniscience. He's perfectly knows himself, and this is entailed in this is his knowledge of the world. And so this all-knowing knower reveals a book to us, and this is from the perspective of the God who knows all things, and it is designed to be understood by finite creatures. And so there is certain and inerrant knowledge in the Bible, and on that basis, on the basis of what is in the Bible, we can develop an epistemology which yields epistemological confidence in our propositions about reality.
Okay, so what I heard was the Bible said so. That seems to be your basis of absolute knowledge. The Bible says so. And that seems quite circular. You're saying that the way to... I know God is real because God told me so, and since God told me so, God is real. That sounds like the Cartesian circle.
That's just not what I said. I'm making a transcendental argument for the existence of God. Right, so I'm laying out what must be the case for intelligibility to be the case.
I'm not asking
and I'm
about,
saying other worldviews.
I'm not asking about the transcendental argument. I'm asking about epistemically, how did you come to this conclusion? So I'm saying, you said in order to have one of these worldviews, you need this revelation thing. Your revelation is God told you so. Where is the logical contradiction in saying God told you so? He was lying.
Yeah, so I mean, once you're talking about a lying God, you're not talking about the Christian God anymore.
I don't care. That wasn't what I was asking. So your idea of a God may not correspond to the actual thing. It may not even be a God. It may just have been an alien who decided to infiltrate your brain and give you visions and say, I, the Christian God, am all powerful and created the universe. There's no logical contradiction in that. So there's no logical contradiction in saying that your entire worldview is just based off of made up feelings you have in your head and nothing more.
Well, that's a self-defeating worldview to posit a God like that. That worldview can't worldview in which God lies.
So this doesn't even need to be God. This is not about God. I could say your revelation itself could have come from aliens. So no God. There's no God in this situation. It's just literal, like, super powerful green beings who have spaceships, and they are messing with your head, and they probe you, and they're just going to give you visions, and all of your revelation just came from these visions that the aliens made up. It's all fake. None of it's real. That doesn't entail a logical contradiction.
Well, then we would still be in the position of not being able to ground any knowledge, and we would just fall into absolute skepticism. And even on that basis, even the statement that nothing is intelligible would be a self-defeating statement. It's impossible that that's the case. And so necessarily,
I'm not following here.
The Christian worldview has to be the case.
So I didn't say anything about the ontology of the world here. Ontology could be any way I want it to be. Your revelation was made up by aliens. There could be an actual God, just not the one you think it is.
Well, yeah, that's an ontological statement, saying that the ontological reality of the world is not the Christian God who reveals. That wasn't ontological.
It could be anything. Ontological. So there's multiple different possibilities here. I'm not stating anything about the fundamental nature of reality. All I'm saying is that your revelation itself was made up. Maybe the Christian God exists, but your revelation wasn't from him. It was from aliens.
Yeah. And so any worldview in which that is the case is a self-defeating worldview and therefore impossible.
It's not a worldview. I didn't list a worldview. I just listed a matter of fact.
Neither did I. I just said any worldview in which that is the case.
I didn't list a worldview. So I listed just a fact. A fact is aliens could have infiltrated your brain and given you a vision. And so your vision is false. It is just a made up thing by aliens. It does not correspond to reality. And there's no logical contradiction in that statement.
Yeah.
Is there?
So I'm agreeing that there's not necessarily a logical contradiction in that statement. But by arguing for that, or by even granting the possibility that that might be true, then you no longer have a basis for an epistemology, is what I'm saying.
I still have I think, therefore I am. So what?
Yeah, that's not a basis for anything, really.
Yeah, it is. It's literally epistemological skepticism is the entire epistemology based on the cogito. You start with the cogitos.
Yeah. So can I read you a quote that is definitive of my own thinking on the cogito?
Okay.
Yeah. So this is from Cornelius Van Til, and this is what he says about the cogito. And you might take this first statement as a little bit offensive. Just remember, this is Van Til saying it, not me. He says, those who seek to flee the voice of God start with the cogito as though it were a rock in the bottomless ocean. They cannot individuate. They cannot show how one fact, if it could be found, can be related to another fact. They cannot account for the uniformity of nature. They cannot use the law of contradiction, except they abuse it, making it destroy individuality as it succeeds in its reduction to abstract unity. They cannot find intelligible meaning in the words cause, substance, or purpose. There is no coherence in their thought. So there's a number of places where the cogito breaks down.
Well, no, so he's just wrong on all of those. He's kind of an idiot. Van Til isn't a very intelligent person. But none of that matters to what I said. So I said you could be under a delusion by aliens. Your revelation is wrong. This is not a positive worldview. There's no logical contradiction in that statement. You've said there's no logical contradiction in that statement. So the contrary isn't impossible. It's literally possible that your entire worldview is just a fiction.
We're talking past each other because I don't think at a single point in this conversation you've accurately understood what I've been saying. And so my contention is that any worldview in which the revelation is not taken as the ultimate starting point, the principium, foundation of all knowledge, reduces to absurdity and is therefore impossible.
Right. I understand your position, but my question is why do you trust your revelation? Because it seems like you had a mystical experience and you trust that mystical experience. We know that's fallacious. We know that doesn't work. That's been debunked for thousands of years. That's a terrible basis of knowledge, but you seem to be thinking this is a good basis in your case for some magical reason. I think it's not. I think you're just imagining what you want to imagine. You have feelings and you correspond those feelings to reality. So I want to know, why should we trust your feelings?
Again, it's not my feelings. I've said that multiple times. You're not understanding my position.
Feelings are synonymous with revelation.
No, not in my worldview. So if you're wanting to run an internal critique of my worldview.
This isn't an internal critique. I'm literally asking you. I'm saying, it seems to me that all you have is your feelings. You have nothing but your feelings. You call it revelation. You think it's a magical feeling that corresponds to some super ultimate reality. To me, it just looks like you have a feeling no different from the drunk guy down the street has a feeling, or the guy on ecstasy has a feeling. So why should we trust your feelings or think that you have anything more than feelings? Because it says like your basis of knowledge is you had a mystical experience with a supernatural being, which seems to be the same as the guy on ecstasy or the guy who has schizophrenia. They also had a powerful experience with an all-powerful being. Why is yours different?
Yeah, that would be like me asking you why you think it's a good idea to punch women in the face. You're just taking a position that I nowhere articulated, and you're asking me why I'm stating that as a basis for my position.
No, I'm not saying this is your worldview. I'm saying this is my worldview. So from my perspective, it seems like what you're saying is you had a feeling, and I can't tell the difference in my world. I'm not saying that you said this. This is what I said. From my perspective, I can't tell the difference between your feeling and revelation and the guy with schizophrenia and his feeling and revelation. To me, they seem the same. They seem equally as plausible and synonymous, epistemically grounded. I don't see any difference or any reason to take your revelation of your personal experience or the Bible any more seriously than the schizophrenic guy down the street. Like why is there any more reason to think that your revelation or personal experience is any different from his or any more reliable than his?
Yeah. So I'm having a difficult time seeing why. Apparently, this is from within your own worldview. So why is it that within your own worldview, you're not able to distinguish my personal feeling from objective content laid out in a book?
Maybe it's because if you're saying the revelation is only the Bible and not your personal feelings, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So I've nowhere given my personal feelings as a basis for my epistemology.
Okay, so I'm that's
in fact I heavily critique competing worldviews for my own for using that as a basis by which they demonstrate their God. Like, for example, Mormonism. You have any two Mormon missionaries knock on their door, they'll tell you the reason you should believe is because they read the Book of Mormon and God told them it was true.
Right. That's not what I understand. I understand. Yeah. So I wasn't when I say your feelings, I'm saying that you read the book as a revelation. You have a feeling that it is the revelation, right? You feel the Bible is the correct revelation, and that's a feeling.
Well, I mean, that's true that I feel it as a revelation, but that's not entering into my justification at all.
Right. I didn't say it was. So I'm saying that you think that the Bible is justification, and you think that because you have this feeling. All right. So I'm saying, why should we trust that your feeling of the Bible is true is any more reliable than the schizophrenic who likes to read Harry Potter and says it's true? Where is what reason do we have to think that your revelation is not just an imaginary feeling you have, like aliens made you feel that it's the revelation, even though it's just a random book?
Yeah. So I mean, I would kick back against calling it merely a feeling. I am assuming the truth content of that, and I am proposing it for your belief, and I'm saying that anything competing with it no longer can account for intelligibility, right? So you're bringing in a foreign element into my argument, and I just like the way you're repeatedly the way that you're repeatedly characterizing my position. I would just as strongly disagree with that as you would. So I'm not talking about I have a belief or I have a feeling that it's revelation, as if it's just a subjective feeling that I believe it's revelation, and so it's objectively true and defensible as a system.
Well, I thought that was one of your criteria.
Talking about,
because I thought you said in order for something to qualify as the grounds of knowledge or whatever, you need one of the things was the revelation thingy. Yeah.
So objective revelation as a foundation of the worldview is one of the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. That says nothing about one's personal subjective feelings.
Right. So this is the only thing I'm critiquing here. So you need a revelation to have grounds for knowledge. If that revelation is not certain and it fails, if it could be wrong, then you don't have that anymore. You've lost it.
That's right? True.
So what I'm saying is, here is a way in which your revelation could be false. Aliens just put the feeling in your head. And if that's the case, then you don't have that anymore, and your own worldview wouldn't work based on your own criteria.
Okay. I think that's a little bit closer to the mark. And if that's what you were saying all along, I apologize that we had to work this hard to get to it. That's probably my fault. So that would constitute a defeater for all knowledge. And so
right. So if we accept your definition that you require revelation and we don't have revelation, then you're right.
Yeah. So that'd be a defeater for all knowledge. And that
just to clarify, I define knowledge differently. I don't think you need a revelation. I think revelation is self-defeating. It can't be a justification.
Well, I mean, yeah, I would define knowledge as justified true belief. Is that what you would?
Sure, but I
define it. Yeah, I'm saying that revelation is necessary for justification. I'm not saying defining knowledge as
right.
including revelation.
Right. I would not. I would say you don't need revelation at all for justification. In fact, it is not.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. And so, yeah. So once you posit a situation like that, you're no longer dealing with the Christian worldview. So that's something I would argue against just as strongly as you would on the same basis.
Well,
And so you're
yeah,
saying you're not doing an internal critique. I'm having a very difficult time seeing how this isn't intended to be an internal critique.
so your definition of knowledge in your worldview entails a reliable revelation of some kind,
Yes.
and that gives you absolute 100% certainty grounds of knowledge kind of a thing. Which means if that revelation could be wrong, and there's no logical contradiction in that revelation being wrong, then Christianity would of course be false, because that if it was false, then your belief system would not correspond to reality. Therefore, your belief system would be non-existent. Therefore, the Christian God, in the way that you believe in him, wouldn't exist. But there's no logical contradiction in saying that. So yes, we are talking about that isn't the Christian God anymore, because if this revelation of yours is false and it wasn't the Christian God who talked to you, then the thing you believe in doesn't exist. It wasn't the thing that talked to you, and so it wasn't the one you imagine. Therefore, because there's no logical contradiction in the idea that your revelation was false, that isn't doesn't give you justification to have absolute knowledge, because it isn't certain.
Yeah. So you can say that McDonald's workers are billionaires, and there's no logical contradiction in that. That doesn't mean that's something that necessarily holds given the worldview analysis. Just saying no, there's no logical contradiction in something that doesn't mean that I don't have any means of determining whether or not that's the case within my worldview.
Well, we already know in your worldview that you think it was the Christian God who talked to you. So I'm positing an alternative. You could be wrong. So I want to know, why should we think you aren't wrong? That this experience was, or this experience regarding the Bible is
and
not just from aliens.
And my consistent answer to that has been the impossibility of the contrary.
It's logically impossible that aliens caused you a feeling that a book that isn't real is real.
So the statement, the proposition, self-contained, divorced from all of its logical entailments, is not a logical contradiction. But when you look at that within the worldview that it necessarily implies, which is a worldview which does not include the Christian God, it reduces to absurdity on the grounds that I think I've talked about.
How does it reduce to absurdity? Like where I'm not seeing the absurdity. Aliens fiddled with your brain and caused you to feel something that wasn't true. I don't see.
Yeah, so it lacks the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, because you no longer have revelation, and so
right. So no revelation, and why is this a problem?
Yeah, so if you posit that is the case, then you lose the ability to posit that is the case, because you lose intelligibility.
That doesn't have an issue to my worldview, because my worldview doesn't entail knowledge for any of the things I've said. So, like, I could not exist, and aliens could still have abducted you and put feelings into your brain. I could have no worldview. I could be completely logically inconsistent, and the fact of the matter, in reality, without any knowledge that I have, or I don't need any grounds of knowledge at all, it could just simply be a fact of the matter that aliens abducted you and put feelings into your brain. So the epistemology, my epistemic basis for knowledge, is irrelevant here, because I'm talking about ontology. It could be ontologically a fact of the matter that aliens abducted you and put feelings into your brain for a book that isn't real. And no epistemic knowledge claims matter to that whatsoever. It's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, so I guess in the next place we would go in the argument would be because this is what I'm trying to imply, and I'm feeling I need to justify it to a greater extent, that does reduce to absurdity ultimately when you follow it to its ultimate conclusions.
Okay, how?
And so I would ask, for example, on a worldview in which that is possible, in which that is something that possibly actually could have happened, how can you how can you grant the laws of logic?
You don't need to.
How do you have any basis for that?
You don't need to. We're not talking about my knowledge here. We're
Why
talking
not?
about ontology. So even if I know nothing, if I don't exist, it makes no difference to the fact of the matter if aliens actually did abduct you and give you feelings. So even if I can't ground knowledge, that doesn't make a difference. I don't need to know anything. Like, I
Well,
could not exist and the argument still holds.
well, yeah, but you're still positing a different worldview, because the worldview you're talking about. I mean,
There's no
so
worldview
so
here. This isn't a
yeah,
worldview. So a worldview is specifically a epistemology, a theory of ethics, and a theory of metaphysics usually. And I haven't
yeah,
posited any of those things. This is not in any way. There's no epistemology here. There's no ethics here. This is just
but
a
no,
simple ontology. It is an ontological fact that aliens
no,
exist and they abducted you and inserted a feeling into you.
no
So no,
worldview is
what?
no worldview is separable from no ontology is separable from a worldview.
Yes, they
Distinguishable,
are.
but separable, no.
So there's the reason a worldview contains an epistemology, metaphysics, and an ethics is because a worldview is a combination of those three things. Those three things on their own are not a worldview. Uh, so that's why they have their own label. So you can have a metaphysics, which ontology is a branch of metaphysics, which has nothing to do with the worldview. There's no possible world semantics. Like possible worlds aren't themselves a worldview.
Yeah. So I mean, the most charitable reading I could give of your argument would be that I have no basis on my worldview for determining whether or not it's the case that that has happened to me.
Sure. I think so.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that was definitely a part of it. So you have no way to distinguish between aliens fiddling with your head and the God actually existing and talking to you.
Okay, but you said sort of, so that's not all of it.
That's the gist of it, but we moved on to the separate point about epistemology, which is completely irrelevant here because I'm only making a claim about ontology, a fact of the way the world is, which is irrelevant to epistemology here. So I don't need to ground any epistemology in this whatsoever. Whether or not I can
Right,
ground knowledge doesn't matter.
but that ontology is not a Christian ontology, and so
Well, right, because
you're mixing an internalist and an externalist critique.
what? No,
You-
no,
You're
this isn't an internal critique. So I'm accepting for the sake of the argument your definition of knowledge that it requires revelation. So just that part is internal. So that part I'm saying, okay, let's assume if that's true. So then I'm saying if you're wrong, like not if your definition is wrong, but if your experience is wrong, then you don't have that. And by your own internal definition, you wouldn't have knowledge. So in that sense, yeah, you're right. I'm combining an internal and external, and there's no contradiction there. Because what I'm saying is if we accept your definition and the facts of the world don't meet your definition, then you're wrong and you need to show that you're not.
But how would you even have any basis for investigating the facts of the world?
It's not my claim to do so. It's yours. You're claiming that you have this revelation and that you need revelation for knowledge. And I've just given you an example that shows you don't have revelation. You don't have certainty in your revelation.
No, I think I do, because by positing that, you're positing something other than the Christian worldview.
Right.
So you're bringing in a claim. You're just saying, what if your worldview is something else? Then it would totally
no. I'm
fail on
saying,
its own
what if your
claims.
worldview is wrong? So you have a worldview. You have a worldview that God spoke to you or wrote the Bible in a revelatory way or something, and that could be wrong. And if it's wrong, you don't have revelation. So I'm not saying what if your internal worldview was changed to something else. I'm not saying I'm not trying to change your worldview at all. I'm saying you could be wrong. There's no logical contradiction in that.
I mean, yeah, there's not necessarily a logical contradiction in the statement, I could be wrong. But everything you're entailing about what would constitute me being wrong is logically self-defeating because it does not include revelation.
So that's the part we've going into how, because there's no logic required at all for this. This is purely ontology. So my epistemic basis is irrelevant here. There's no ontological contradiction with your idea of the world being wrong.
On that ontology, you have no basis for your knowledge
That's
because you have
epistemology.
no basis for.
Epistemology does not matter here whatsoever. So I made no claims about epistemology,
Yeah,
only
yeah.
about ontology.
But ontologies have epistemological fallouts.
Uh, maybe, but that's kind of irrelevant to anything I said. So
Oh, it's absolutely not irrelevant because you're positing a completely different ontology from my own and saying,
yes.
well, what if that's actually the case?
Yes.
And I'm saying that would have a completely different epistemological fallout.
I don't care what
And
happens
so
epistemology.
on that ontology, you would have a completely different epistemology.
So again, it doesn't matter. Epistemology doesn't matter here. So unless you can show a contradiction in the ontology itself, what happens in the epistemology doesn't matter. It's not a contradiction to have silly epistemologies. I don't care how silly the epistemologies can go. If there's no logical contradiction in the ontology, which is the only claim I'm making, then there's no logical contradiction in the Christian God being wrong.
You're wanting to tweak aspects of my system without it touching other aspects of my system.
No, I don't want to. This is not about your system. So I'm saying your system is wrong. Here is one way your system could be wrong, and there's no logical contradiction. So,
well, yeah, if my system was that, it would be wrong. But that's not my system.
I'm not in any way characterizing your system. At no point in this conversation am I attempting to characterize your system. I don't care about your system. What I'm saying is here is a way your system could be wrong. So you have an idea, your idea is wrong. This is the real way the world is. This is the real ontology. Your idea about ontology is wrong. And so you have an idea that there's a Christian God that does not correspond to reality. So the Christian God does not exist. The Christian ideology is false. There is a different ontology. And this ontology entails, as far as I know, 3 facts. Aliens abducted you. They made you feel something for the Bible. And it's not real. There's lots of other ontological facts in this worldview too, presumably. Don't know them, don't care. Where is the logical contradiction in the ontology? I don't care about the epistemology. Grounds of knowledge don't make a difference here. I could just say no humans have knowledge. There's no logical contradiction in that. So perfectly fine. Just say there's no knowledge in this universe. I don't care.
Yeah, when you're saying logical contradiction, that's an epistemological question. Is it not?
No. So like when I want to, if I'm talking about the ontology, what exists is there's no contradiction in the apple exists and does not exist. That doesn't exist in this universe. There's no like ontological contradiction. The epistemology is irrelevant. I could just say we all have illogical epistemologies. We all believe in A equals not A. The fact that we have this silly belief doesn't make a difference. It's not logically contradictory that humans are deluded to the point of having contradictory beliefs. That's happened. We have that. So I can just grant every human has stupid, logically contradictory beliefs. I don't care. But the universe itself does not entail a contradiction. So the ontology itself has no contradiction, and there is no Christian God. Therefore, it's not logically impossible to have the contrary.
Yeah, so logically impossible to have the contrary. Yes, I'd say it's logically impossible that the contrary is the case, because on that ontology, epistemology would be impossible.
Again, that doesn't matter.
That's the whole point.
You're confusing epistemology and ontology. It's just like philosophy 101. You have to separate the two. They're not the same. No matter what you do to epistemology, it's irrelevant to ontology.
I'm not saying they're the same. I'm saying that the ontology would have to have epistemological fallout. So if
that's confusing epistemology and ontology, because none of my claim has anything to do with epistemology. So I can grant everyone in this world, their epistemology is crazy and they believe logical contradictions. I don't care. There's no contradiction in the existence of that. I don't care if people don't have grounds for knowledge.
But you're wanting to divorce this from a system, and I don't think that can be done.
I don't know what you mean by divorce this from a system.
Right. So you're changing something in my system and calling it my worldview.
No, I'm not. I'm not doing that. This is not your worldview. I can say that this is not your worldview. You do not believe this. Obviously, you do not believe that you were kidnapped by aliens and they made you feel something. Obviously, I know you don't believe that. I don't care what you believe. What I'm saying is here is a way you could be wrong. Here is an ontology of the way the world could be in which you're wrong. So there's no logical contradiction in that world existing.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm saying that the impossibility of the contrary disproves that.
So I just proved it's possible. So how is
because if that is the ontology, there is no objective inerrant revelation on which we can base all knowledge.
right? I don't care. That doesn't change. That's not a contradiction.
Well,
I can say there is no grounds for all knowledge. Okay, that's not a logical contradiction.
You're asking me to operate outside of my system, and it's impossible to do.
I don't think so. So I'm saying, in this world I've described, we have no grounds of knowledge. Okay, is there a logical contradiction in the existence of a world where humans do not have a ground for knowledge? No.
Yeah. So I feel like we haven't fully been able to go down this trail of the impossibility of the contrary, because that's what because. So again, if that ontology is the case, then you no longer have a grounds for knowledge because
I've accepted that. I don't care if I have a grounds for knowledge. It doesn't matter. Like the world existing and not having a grounds for knowledge doesn't entail a contradiction. That's fine. You can have no grounds for knowledge and have the world exist.
But if that's the case, then we wouldn't be able to say that that's the case.
I don't care. Our ability to say so is irrelevant from it being the case. The truth is independent of our ability to say it's true.
Right. I mean, trying to figure out how to come up, because we're just talking past each other at this point.
Well, I've made a very strong point that you would need to address. If you're missing the point, then I can try to explain it more clearly.
Yeah, I feel like I've sufficiently addressed the point, and that's a problem here.
Well, definitely not. So you keep confusing epistemology and ontology. So I can just grant we don't have grounds for knowledge. Okay, that's not a logical contradiction. So you haven't shown there's a logical contradiction in this world by claiming that we don't have a grounds for knowledge. Like, that's fine. We don't need one. So in this world where you have been kidnapped by aliens, no beings have a grounds for objective knowledge. Okay. Granted. That's not a logical contradiction in the existence of the world. There is no apple that exists and does not exist at the same time. So the ontology does not entail a contradiction. The epistemology doesn't matter. I can just grant as many contradictions in our subjective epistemology as you want. Doesn't change the ontology one bit.
Right. And so if what you're suggesting is the case, then it is basically your worldview that is correct and not my worldview. Right?
Yes, my alien worldview, yes.
Well, not an alien worldview, but a worldview that lacks a God who has objectively revealed himself.
Sure.
Yeah, that's closer to your worldview than mine, certainly.
Sure.
And you have knowledge.
Yes, I believe I have knowledge, though I define it very differently than you do.
Yeah. And so, because you have knowledge, I'm saying that necessarily entails an objective revelation. And so, on my worldview, within my system, that is a refutation of the idea. So, let me clarify.
Can
my worldview?
You're saying that you define knowledge as something that requires a revelation. We have knowledge, and therefore a revelation must exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's circular. It's like if I said, I am God, I exist, therefore I am God. Like, wait a minute. Like, if I define my own thing that I already have as having properties, I can insert as many properties as I want into it. And since I already know it exists, it's circular. So like if I said, my bank account has elephants in it, I have a bank account, therefore I have elephants. No, it does not follow. So the fact that we have knowledge, how did you come to the conclusion that you need divine revelation for that?
Yeah. So I demonstrate that by the impossibility of the contrary. All right. So your whole critique, basically what you're doing is you're asking, can my system internalize that critique? So do I have a basis for on my own grounds for saying that I have not been abducted by aliens and had my mind scrambled around to believe that we need objective revelation? And I think I've shown you that my worldview can internalize that and refute it on its own grounds.
What do you mean? So, like, my question is just the basic scientific question of your experiment went wrong and you just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And one of the
So
infinitely
that's
many ways it could have gone wrong.
that's not a problem on my worldview because of the need for objective revelation
Right.
for knowledge
I'm not
to
saying this is a
exist.
problem with your worldview. I'm saying it's a problem that I have with your worldview. So it seems to me like your worldview is silly because you're just treating your
Well, I
subjective experience like the drunk guy down the street, and I don't see a difference. And so this is
okay. Now we're getting somewhere. I don't care how you feel about my worldview and how you analyze it from within your system.
right. I'm not
I
saying you
care
do.
about I care about how my worldview can or cannot account for critiques and problems on its own grounds.
Right. So I'm saying, as most human beings are not precepts, and I think precepts are very silly, here's one of the reasons why I think precepts are very silly. So if any human beings agree with my starting point, that I think therefore I am is reasonable, and that there is no functional difference between your revelation and the drunk guy's revelation, then everyone should reject your worldview. So you would need to demonstrate to everyone's satisfaction, or to anyone who is potentially going to convert or accept presuppositionalism, a reason that your revelation or your worldview is better than the drunk guy down the street. And your response to that was the impossibility of the contrary. That's like the drunk guy saying he's not drunk. So it seems to me that your basis of requiring revelation is the fact that you've defined knowledge as entailing revelation. So we have knowledge. We know we have knowledge. We both agree we have knowledge, and you entail revelation in that definition. Say, well, to have knowledge, you need revelation. Therefore, because we have knowledge, revelation follows. It's just, but that doesn't follow. Like, you don't need revelation for knowledge, or
Yeah,
you haven't demonstrated why we would need revelation for knowledge.
we haven't played with any worldviews to see what a worldview without revelation looks like, and how that fails on its own grounds. And here's another thing, and this is something that I see you pretty consistently do in your debates, is that critique very much works when you're not willing to delve into the particulars of the system. And so you can equate the drunk guy's feeling and the whole Christian worldview, and there's no logical problem with that, as long as you're only talking about them by name and not actually talking about the content of those things. But I find it very disingenuous to equate the content of a drunk man's ramblings and the content of the Christian worldview as though they basically have the same epistemic value and the same truth value,
Why?
and can be investigated in a similar way.
Why? I think they can be. Most philosophers do.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well, I mean, just to be fair, so
the
in any claim anybody
the
makes,
ramblings.
I just want to clarify 1 second. So any claims anybody ever makes, we investigate them all in the exact same way. So we investigate the drunk man's ramblings just like we do Einstein's theories, as just like we do any theory. So we take all claims, we put them through the same methodology, regardless of who's making them. I'm just saying that from what I've seen, the claims of Christianity equate to about the claims of a drunk guy. I don't see a difference. And you claim that the one thing I'd like to know is, why do we need revelation for knowledge? You mentioned we haven't gone through the particulars of the worldview or something, but I'd like to know just more generally, why do you need revelation to have knowledge? Why can't you have knowledge without revelation?
Well, so first, let me ask you this, and you're not. I think you're not going to see the relevance of this, but it's going to be linked to a chain of reasoning. Do you grant that if there is in fact objective revelation from God that we have access to, that we would have knowledge based on off of that?
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, so what would be the problem with it?
You could just be telling us not the truth. So, like, it depends on if what God was telling us corresponded to reality, and we could show that it corresponded to reality independent of his say so.
Yeah, so So he could be not telling the truth, so God is a liar.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
so
see no
that's
problem.
that's not the Christian God, though. So I'm
Right,
asking
but again, so so
on my
since you're
worldview.
asking me about from my perspective, if God gave us divine revelation, would that be trustworthy? My answer from my worldview is we would need to establish its value first. We wouldn't just trust it on face value. No, we would have to go further. Like if it made novel testable predictions, we can confirm those. Then we could start to add some.
Right. I'm not asking about within your world. I'm asking on my worldview. Does that grant knowledge? So
Of
can
course,
we?
you define it that way. You define knowledge
Right.
that way.
Right. Exactly. So it's just a really simple question to grant a step in the argument. Or I think it's a non-controversial step that on my worldview that does grant knowledge.
Sure. That's how you define
So,
it. Sure.
yeah. Yeah. So sometimes I have trouble with that, so I do have to ask the question. Now, I claim that only that yields knowledge. And an obvious defeater to that position would be to show anything else that grants knowledge.
Uh,
Any other basis for knowledge.
well, I'm still not sure because you need to try to explain to me what you think knowledge is, what it requires, and why it would require revelation for me to
Yeah.
be able
So
to give you the answer there.
anything else that yields justified true belief.
I exist. I think therefore I am.
Yeah. So therefore that implies logic. So
Nope.
there's logic already there.
Nope. Logic is the sentence. So the sentence requires logic, but the existence itself does not require logic. So even if I couldn't think clearly, I would still exist. So my ability to use logic is irrelevant here. I'm just using that to talk to you, but that's irrelevant to my existence. If I couldn't speak, it wouldn't change
Right.
anything.
But you're not saying an analytic statement. You're synthesizing two things. You're saying that there is something occurring called thinking, and that it necessarily implies something else, which is existence.
Nope, those are synonymous. So thinking and existence are the same thing in most versions of the cogito.
Thinking and existing are the same. Can
Yes.
you qualify? Can you justify that?
They literally mean the same thing in the sentence. So, like, the thinking is a specific process that entails existence. It is a thing occurring in reality, so it is existence.
So if they're the same thing, then you could just as easily say I am, therefore I am.
Yeah, you could just say I exist. You don't even need, it's a tautology if you say it twice. So I exist and I can experience my existence. So again, the sentence makes no difference here. Analyzing the sentence is irrelevant. It's purely descriptive. It's like saying the sky is blue. Like, doesn't matter if you don't need the laws of English for the sky to be blue. It's irrelevant. The laws of English apply to the sentence that I need to say the sky is blue in a coherent way, but the coherence in the sentence itself is irrelevant to the fact of the matter. The sky exists and it is in fact blue, reflecting that wavelength of light. So my existence, the fact that I exist, is irrelevant to any logic, any of the statement, any of the argument. All of that is just descriptive of the fact that I exist.
Well, if it's simply tautological and you're just saying I exist, then it's just arbitrarily stated. You're giving that with no evidence whatsoever.
I experience it. It's the experiencing it that is the evidence.
So the experience is a justification. So already you have something more basic than I exist in your worldview, and so there is a logical entailment there.
No, again, the logic is purely descriptive, nothing else. I am thinking because I have this experience right now. There's no logic here. The sentence doesn't matter. Ants have experience. The ants don't have logic. They don't care. They still have experience, and so they exist.
Yeah.
And so if they have a belief I exist, and they have a justification from their experience, they now have a justified true belief that they exist.
Yeah. So you're saying one thing and doing something entirely different, where I'll ask you for a justification, for example, why do you exist? And you'll give me a logical answer. Then I ask how you account for the usage of logic, and you're saying you're not using logic, and
right.
It's irrelevant.
Correct. So the sentence, you're asking for a justification of the way I'm using the sentence, like asking.
I'm not asking for a justification of the way you're using the sentence.
Yes, you are.
I'm asking to justify. No, I'm not. I'm asking for a justification of the fact represented by the sentence.
No. So the fact is that I exist and I have experience of it. Though, like I don't. I literally experience them. I don't justify them. The experience itself is the justification.
Yeah. So by using justification, you're entailing logic.
No. So again, logic is irrelevant to the experience. The experience exists with or without logic. Makes no difference.
Well, yeah, the experience exists with and without logic. I can grant that, but the fact that that entails existence, I still think needs to be justified. Because I mean, whether or not you'll admit it, you are arguing for a
How
logical
can you
entailment.
think and not exist? Like it's literally the same thing. What the thinking, if the
Well, I
thought
mean, yeah,
is
I'm
occurring, the thought exists, occurring
I'm
in
I'm not
reality.
I'm not saying that you can separate those. And I would zoom out though and say that the only reason that you cannot separate those is because of the Christian worldview does give a basis for logic.
The basis
And
for
so
logic doesn't matter. So assume there's
we
no
can go
basis for
into
logic.
this.
Assume there's no basis for logic. Can you think and not exist at the same time?
If there's no logic, then perhaps yeah.
No, so that's incorrect. That is the incorrect answer. So logic describes reality, not the other way around. Bases for logic are irrelevant. They don't make anything occur. Reality is reality with or without our
Well,
language.
yeah, that's a problem when you're saying logic is a description of reality. That's an a posteriori model of logic, and so you're sneaking that into the cogito ergo sum, and
No,
you're using that as a foundation for a worldview, but sneaking in a posteriori reasoning into it, and so it can't function as a basis for the worldview. It's viciously circular.
nope. So that's wrong. So the construction of logic itself comes after the experience of existing. So I have an experience, I exist, and then I create a language of logic to describe that experience.
Yeah, existing doesn't entail logic, though.
You're right. It's a language. I like ants can exist and they don't have logic. So, as I said, I exist. I have an experience of existence, and then I make up a language. That is a camera. That is a TV. One is one and not the other. So I've now just created the law of identity and the
Yeah.
law of non-contradiction.
So if you've made it up, then what guarantee do you have that it actually corresponds to reality?
It's meant to describe my experience, and those are the things I'm experiencing.
So what? So what? It's meant to describe your experience.
Uh,
How do you know that you're accurately synthesizing your experience
I
to
don't. It doesn't make a difference. Like I didn't say I'm accurately synthesizing reality. I just said I'm created a language to describe my experience. I experience a camera, I label it camera, and I claim it's not the same as the TV. Whether it is or not makes no difference. The language works very well to describe my experience. My experience corresponding to reality here is irrelevant.
yeah? It absolutely is relevant though, because if it needs to correspond, I mean, still, if it's your experience is a part of reality, right?
Sure,
So the fact that you're experiencing it is still an aspect of reality. So
definitely.
if you're going into it with the assumption that you can logically perceive these things, synthesize these perceptions, whether or not they have any
Nope.
correspondence to the
Nope.
outside
I
world.
don't. There's no logic here. So I just have an experience. I have zero words. I can say literally nothing, but I'm going to describe it to you in the third person. I have this
Yeah,
experience, and I can
I
label
think
the things.
I think the contention that there's no logic here is just absurd on its face.
Do ants have logic?
Well, I mean, they reason and they use brains. I mean, you can say it's ultimately instinct.
Yeah. So that they have no logic.
But
They haven't constructed a language of logic whatsoever. They just see or smell and then follow the trail.
well, yeah, I mean, we do define logic differently. When I refer to logic, I'm referring to the thing that you say your logic is describing.
Reality?
Well, I mean, in a particular aspect of reality, yeah.
Okay. So how could something exist and not be describable by other abstract terms?
I'm not seeing the relevance.
Logic is a made up abstract language that we use to describe things that exist or and don't exist.
Uh-huh.
So if
Well,
something,
on your worldview, yeah.
yes, and the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, very first language of classical logic. But so if the reality is real, then a made up language would be able to describe it. Reality is real. Yes?
If we can fruitfully interact with reality, yeah. But I
No.
can't grant that on your
I,
basis.
let's suppose I can't interact with reality. I can still make up a language and say reality is real. Does it describe reality?
Not necessarily if you're not if you have no experience of reality. If you're
Does the sentence reality is reality describe reality even though the sentence itself is not conscious?
Yeah, so I think obviously that is the case, but I don't think you have a basis for saying that because it assumes a law of identity.
The law of identity is the sentence. So the sentence itself, like reality, is literally the law of identity. A is A. So that law, A equals A, is true because it describes reality. Reality precedes logic, not the other way around.
Yeah, but if the laws of logic are simply descriptions that we gain from observation under your worldview, then using that as a basis for synthesizing, processing, coming to true statements about reality, use on the basis of our observations, it's ultimately circular.
No,
It's viciously circular.
no, it's not viciously circular because it's
because you're
describing the experience. So the experience is the first thing, and I'm not using the experience itself as logic. The experience isn't logic. Logic is a second thing I've made up to describe the experience. So it's not circular.
so the experience let me so the experience is first, logic is a second thing you use to describe the experience, and then using that description you can accurately process your experiences.
Not sure what you mean by process here. So if like we can use logic to create models and then use those models to apply to our
Well,
experience and to see if it actually describes our experience.
we can. Well, that's it's is logic the basis upon which we reason about and come to conclusions concerning our experience? Is logic the tool that we use?
Yes.
Yes. And so, what tool did you use to describe the experience and arrive at a law of logic?
A language prior to a formal system. So like words like and ah.
So, did the language have any logic to it?
Yes. After we have discovered logic, we can then use logic in order to find a pattern in
No. Before, logically, before you described logic, you came up with the language.
Right.
Did the language have a logic to it?
Right.
Prior to that.
Yes, it was describing the patterns in reality that we experience.
So you're not seeing the problem here.
Nope. So I see a camera, I see a TV, and I create sounds to describe the differences that I see in those things.
Yeah. So you have the language. Where does the logic in that language come from?
The experience. It's describing the differences in the experience.
If you're using that to construct the logic, then logic comes logically after the language. But yes, you're assuming the logic is already there in the language.
Logic was invented after language was.
No. We're talking about the cogito ergo sum. So this is all happening within your mind.
Yeah, so my mind is I just have an experience. I see a camera, I see a TV, and then I make sounds to describe those things. Camera, TV. And then I construct a language to describe the patterns that I see. Like, oh, this thing has shapes, and it is one thing and not that thing. Oh, that's a law. A is A and not A.
So there's a logic hanging out there somewhere without any grounding.
No, that's reality. Your language can then be brought into
conformity.
Reality exists, and reality has differences in it, and then those differences I observe and then label with categories.
Yeah. So there's a logic assumed in that.
Nope. Reality has differences. Does not assume a logic. It assumes reality exists and has properties to it.
Yeah, it takes logical logical reasoning to deduce that reality can, there's things that can be distinguished within
You
reality.
don't need to deduce anything for reality to exist.
Well, no, not for it to exist, but for things to be distinguishable within it. Yeah, that's what you said. That
Right.
there are things
I
distinguishable
have
within reality.
so there are things distinguishable within reality, and then I make up a language called logic to do the distinguishing.
Okay, so that still implies that there's something logical about reality that you're describing.
No, it implies reality exists, and I use logic to describe the reality. It's not
Yeah,
like reality is just going to be inherently random, and even if it was, it would still be described by a language. So
but
there's
why
no
does it?
logic there in reality.
But why does it exist that way?
Why is reality reality?
No, not why is reality reality. Why does it have the properties that it does?
So why is reality reality?
Now that I think you can clearly distinguish the two questions.
Not really. I'm not sure what you mean here. Like, why is reality have patterns and not insanely random and
Right.
chaotic?
I mean, yeah, that's one way to phrase the question. Reality is a very broad term that can encompass very many possible realities. But you're saying that reality is a specific way. In other words, we can form distinctions within it that are actually meaningful and relate to reality as it is.
Well, I didn't say that part. So that comes way later in the argument. So all I said was I made a distinction between what I experience. I don't care if it actually corresponds to anything yet.
Yeah, but that could be a totally artificial distinction.
It could be. It doesn't make a difference to anything I've said yet in my argument.
Right, then logic wouldn't correspond to reality. If
doesn't need to yet, so it corresponds to my experience, and my experience is in reality.
so if it doesn't correspond to reality, and experience is in reality, if there's a disconnect between your experience and reality, you wouldn't have any way of determining that. And then if your experience is a part of reality,
not yet. So obviously my experience is in reality, and I experience things that look differently, and I can label them differently. Now, whether or not that corresponds to reality as it is, the ontology, is irrelevant. Doesn't make a difference. So I could be like, everything's a delusion. I'm hallucinating the camera and hallucinating the TV, but I can still create a language of logic to describe the apparent differences in those things that I see.
Yeah, that's assuming that there's something logical there in the first place.
No, it's assuming that I experience. Well, it's not assuming anything. I experience it. It's not an assumption. And then I make up a language to describe the thing I'm experiencing. There's no assumptions there. There's no presumptions at all.
I don't see how there can possibly not be a presumption in that.
I have experience, no assumptions. I experience fact.
But the part where you get to that there are distinguishable things within that experience, the part that actually corresponds to the reality of your experience.
Wait. So none of that matters.
The logical entailments.
So again, I have an experience. I experience a camera on a TV or whatever you want to label that. It doesn't make a difference. It is a fact that in this experience, these things are distinguishable. They have differences to them as far as I can tell, made up in my head as far as I know. I don't really care, but they are distinguishable. So it's a fact that I'm having an experience, and that experience entails distinguishable things. There's no assumption there.
So you're still talking about entailment and logic.
Nope.
Before you get to describing the logic itself. So there's a logic that exists before you have created the logic in this system.
All that exists, or all that I'm aware of, is my experience and the things that I can presumably distinguish between.
I don't care if that's what you're aware of or not. You're still talking about entailment and justification.
Nope.
I have an experience. It's your terminology. It's not mine.
I have an experience. That's it.
Yes, and then you take another step after that.
Right. There's differences in the experience.
Before you get to constructing logic.
Right. So there's differences in my experience.
Which entails something. Right?
No, it's just literally a fact of the experience itself. It's a property of the experience.
So there's no entailments whatsoever.
Nope, it's literally just a property of the experience. The experience itself.
All right. So if there's no entailing happening, then how do you get to the next step?
I make up words to describe the differences in my experience.
Right, which is completely arbitrary on
Yes.
so far.
That's how making up words works. It's completely arbitrary. Yes.
Right. And the fact that there actually is something distinguishable within your experience that has no basis whatsoever on anything,
Could be an
it just
illusion. Makes no difference. It's
is the
just,
case.
yeah, it just is the case. So in my experience, it could be an illusion, but it seems like there's a camera there and a TV there, and I make up words for them.
Okay, and that entails something else. So what does that entail?
What are you talking about?
Where we are so far, like we've entailed something. So how do we get to the next logical step?
Entailed entails that I made up words and then I make up patterns in those words.
Right, and so keep building the system. This is
Okay.
to see how the system builds.
So when making up patterns in these words, I notice that thing is that thing and not that thing, and so I make up the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, based off of my descriptions of these experiences I have.
Okay, so at this point we have laws of logic.
Yes.
But not before.
Nope.
All right. So how did you get those entailments and get to the point that you have logic without logic?
I saw it and I labeled it, and then I found a pattern in the way I was labeling things.
Right, and the pattern doesn't entail logic at all.
The pattern.
So the fact that there's patterns and that you can recognize them, and that
right.
you can identify that one thing is equal to another thing and another thing is not equal to this other thing.
Right.
That
the differences
does not
themselves
already entail.
The differences themselves do not entail logic. No, that's just my experience. Like I could be an ant and not be able to differentiate, or I could be crazy and not be able to differentiate. So the experience themselves and the differentiation between the experience does not entail logic. No.
Yeah, but so it entails that reality is such, or some part of reality is such, that there are things that are identifiable with one another and things that are distinguishable from one another.
Yes, reality exists.
Right. So why is reality such that some things are identifiable with each other and other things are distinguishable from one another?
That isn't a part of my argument yet. That's way down the line. So you never start with ontology because it's circular.
You're utilizing that though.
Oh, no, I haven't.
So I've just because reality is.
I've never claimed I knew why reality was reality. I don't need to. Like you can't start with that. It's circular to start with what reality is. You have to start with I think and I experience it, and then try to build up a knowledge of what reality is. But you can't start with what reality is.
But to assert that there's
I'm still not seeing how this has anything to do with why you need revelation. Still not following at all.
Well, because I don't think you can construct an epistemology off of what you're doing here.
Well, I just did. It's literally called epistemic solipsism. It's a proven in philosophy. So why do you need revelation here?
Yeah. So there's something within reality that actually is distinguishable from something else within reality, even if that's completely within your system.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
But the fact that you're stating that actually is the case, and you don't have a basis for determining whether or not that's the case yet, it's 100% arbitrary. So I'm not talking about your experience
Wait, like it's
right now. I'm talking about
so yeah, I want to clarify. So
about the very nature of reality are arbitrary, because you are asserting something about reality, even if that reality is purely within your experience.
Right. So I'm claiming about reality that I see different things and I label those different things. So we're like those things may not exist. It may be illusion.
Right. But the fact that you're seeing them and identifying them indicates that there is something distinguishable between them.
Sure. Maybe just in my head, but yes.
Right. So how do you justify that there's something distinguishable between them?
Because I'm experiencing them differently.
Right. So the justification is in your experience.
I'm experiencing them differently. So the experience itself is the justification. Yes.
Okay. So everything is grounded completely arbitrarily.
No, because arbitrary means based off of no set of laws. There's a specific law here. It is that I experience it.
This specific law is before logic. So where is the specific law coming from?
It's the experience itself. So law is not a logical law here. Laws just describing patterns here. So you don't need the, oh God, the logic is irrelevant here. So my experience, I have an experience and I experience some things differently and I describe that. So I'm still, no way have I seen anything you've said that entails revelation here.
Yeah, well, we're still getting there.
Okay, let's just skip to the part where we explain why we need revelation.
Yeah, so you're assuming that there actually is something in reality that makes it so that things are distinguishable from one another, even if it's purely within your experience.
No.
And so,
well, so I'm not assuming that. I'm literally experiencing that. So I experience the things differently. So obviously something's going to have to cause that, unless I was the necessary being or whatever. So clearly there's probably, I'm made of a brain of some kind, and the brain differentiates stuff for me automatically. I don't assume any of that, but I just know that whatever's going on, I experience things differently.
Yeah, but how are you differentiating it? But so I mean, if
I literally see things differently,
right? If
different colors, there's a color there and a color there. My brain is doing the distinguishing. I'm not doing anything.
If universals and particulars are completely a posteriori, how do you distinguish the first universals and particulars?
What? I haven't. The particulars I've established. I haven't established any universals yet.
Yeah, so if you can identify two things with each other, that implies something of a universal, either arbitrary or non-arbitrary.
Nope. You can have purely subjective, paraconsistent logic where it's an identifiable only within some subset of reality. So it doesn't actually entail a universal. But that's irrelevant.
It implies that two things have something in common and are thus identifiable with each other
in that specific frame of mind. So like maybe if you have a paraconsistent logic, you have one system where there's a camera there and a TV there, but in a different system, it would be something different. So it's not, there's no universal there.
I don't care about whether it's not, it's just within your mind or whatever.
No, I don't mean just like, so if I said the camera is there and the TV is there, and logically they're two different things. If there's a different universe where the laws of logic operate differently, like a paraconsistent logic or a diletheistic logic, then that statement would be false in that universe. So that's not a universal statement that the camera is there and the TV is there and they are themselves in this universe. That wouldn't, in paraconsistent logic, that wouldn't be necessarily a universal statement. But that's, I'm still not seeing how this relates to needing revelation.
So even if you disagree, just let me finish the sentence this time. So what I'm seeing is that you have laws and logic before, and I know you disagree with this, but you have laws and logic before logic, and so you're just assuming logic grounded out there in the nether somewhere, and then using that for the basis of a system, which is viciously circular and cannot yield an epistemology.
Well, no, so I've proven
it's
not
self-defeating. It's impossible.
That's false. So it's, in order for it to be viciously circular, the premise has to be in the conclusion. I never said a premise in the conclusion, so it can't be viciously circular unless you can demonstrate one of my premises in one of my conclusions.
You're assuming logic.
No, I'm not. Logic. You're equivocating any pattern that exists in reality and calling any pattern that exists logic. That's not what it is. Logic is a language to describe the patterns. It isn't the patterns themselves.
I don't grant that.
Don't grant what?
Well, I mean, on one level, this is just purely semantic, because if we just drop the word logic, so I'm saying you're assuming that there is something about reality that's distinguishable from other things in reality.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
While already assuming that there's so you're proving that there's patterns by assuming that there's patterns.
I've assumed no patterns. I literally see them. I see a pattern. I see differences. So I see a pattern. I've assumed nothing. And then I make a language to describe the pattern.
But it's assuming the patterns are in fact there.
They could be fictional. I don't care. I know for a fact that I experience the patterns. I don't care if the patterns are there.
If we haven't established anything about the nature of reality yet, then if they're fictional, they could still be in reality. So fictional is still an aspect of reality.
So again, I've assumed nothing. I literally see differences. I assume nothing. I see differences and I make a language to describe those differences. So there's nothing, literally nothing is assumed there at all. There can be no assumptions. It's just direct experience.
Right. and again, that's assuming something about your cognitive functions.
No, it's not. I assume nothing about
So
my cognitive functions.
If your cognitive functions cannot yield true beliefs,
I don't care.
then you, well, if your cognitive functions cannot yield true beliefs, then you're literally constructing false beliefs.
That's fine.
So
It doesn't make a difference.
you could be coming to the conclusions that you're seeing a pattern when in fact you're not seeing a pattern.
That's fine. It doesn't make a difference. I still see a pattern.
Right, but your cognitive function is not working correctly undercuts that.
It doesn't make a difference. So if you
don't care whether or not,
so it doesn't, like, again, this is the claim. God can't make me think I exist when I don't. He can't make that statement false. He can't say, if I think I exist, God can't make that statement false. So if I think I experience a camera and a TV, it doesn't matter whether or not I'm actually, literally, I am experiencing it. If I think I'm experiencing it, then by definition, I am experiencing it. So there's no assumptions there. It doesn't matter if my brain is capable of experiencing it. Necessarily it has to be because I'm experiencing it. So none of those have to be assumed here. I'm just literally experiencing these things, which are necessarily true because they are in my experience. But again, you haven't in any way answered the question of why you need revelation for any of this.
Right. Well. So there is a worldview in which revelation does yield knowledge. So we've already
defines it that way. But why do you need it?
We've already granted that.
Yeah. Yes. Anyone can define knowledge as revelation, but why do you need it? Why is it required?
Right. So if every other formulation of how reality actually is cannot yield knowledge, then the worldview that can account for knowledge on its own grounds must necessarily be the case.
No.
Yeah, well, if literally every other formulation of how reality is impossible.
No, so those are two separate things. So
if it defeats itself on its own terms.
No, so those are two different claims. Claiming that there is knowledge is impossible does not mean that one in which knowledge is not impossible is true. So you can just say, we don't have knowledge. There's no logical contradiction in that.
Right. But if I say we don't have knowledge, then I'm undercutting my own, I'm defeating that belief by saying we don't have knowledge, because that's a knowledge claim.
Doesn't make a difference here. So the claim here is that there is no logical contradiction in the existence of a world where there is no true knowledge. Knowledge doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I say we don't have knowledge, then I'm making a true belief, and and it's justified in that case because I've reasoned my way to the true belief that we don't have knowledge.
Right, but there's no revelation there. So you can. I want to clarify this. So if you add an arbitrary definition to knowledge, knowledge must be purple. If it's not purple, it's not knowledge. Then there's no knowledge in the universe because no belief is purple.
Right, but you can show a self-consistent system in which knowledge is not purple. You can't show a self-consistent system in which knowledge does not entail revelation.
It's irrelevant to the argument here. So the argument here is
That's not.
No, clearly it is. So what your argument is that you claimed that if one system has a self-consistent definition of knowledge while all others don't, then that proves that system is correct. That is false. I can have a perfectly self-consistent definition of knowledge and have it still be false. So the fact that even if it was, which yours isn't, Christian worldview completely fails, as I showed before, because your revelation is no different than the drunk guy, and you haven't demonstrated otherwise at all. So, but even your claim that just saying that you have a self-consistent definition isn't evidence that it's true. There are many self-consistent definitions that are not true. Cats are dogs, dogs are chickens, therefore cats are chickens.
Yeah, so a self-consistent definition is not what I'm claiming. I'm claiming a system which actually can yield knowledge on its own grounds.
That's a self-consistent definition. So if I define knowledge as a potato, there is a potato. This worldview has knowledge.
So, but I'm talking about worldviews. I'm not talking about just the definition. So you'd have to tell me more about that worldview.
Wait. So what's the difference here? So it seems like you've defined knowledge as a godly potato, and there's a godly potato in your worldview. Therefore, your worldview has knowledge, which seems no different than me saying knowledge is a potato. I have a potato. I have knowledge.
That's not at all what this conversation has been.
So this is a new thing. I'm asking you a new thing. And it seems like you have added an arbitrary criterion to knowledge, which is completely irrelevant and is circular and does nothing but just try to support your own worldview with no evidence. And
Yeah.
I can do the same thing by making up my own definition.
So it's not just the definition of knowledge. So on my worldview, on its own grounds, it can come to knowledge. Other worldviews, considering their ontologies, their epistemologies, their ethics all together, they cannot come to knowledge. So it's not sufficient for you to just give the definition in isolation, because you can come up with a million internally consistent just definitions completely alienated from the worldviews in which they might exist. But we still have to talk about the worldviews.
Don't make a difference here. So like, I think therefore I am is justified.
Well, then you're not.
So I have an experience, and that experience justifies my belief. I believe I exist, and I don't need to know if it's true. I don't need to know, like, or let me do a different one. I believe there is a TV in front of me. I have a justification from my experience, and so I have a belief. Now, I could be in the matrix, but if it's true that the TV is in front of me, I have knowledge. I don't need certainty that the TV is in front of me, because whether or not it's true is independent of my knowledge of it being true. Like, I don't need to know with 100% certainty that the TV is there. I just need to have a belief, and it to be justified. And if it's true about reality, I have knowledge, no reference to a God.
Yeah. So it's not, so it could be a true belief, right?
Sure.
But it's not justified if the manner by which you come to that knowledge is full of undercutting defeaters on your own system.
Yeah, it is. My system doesn't require certainty, so it can be fine if there's defeaters.
Right. I'm not saying it does. It requires certainty, but I'm saying you can't even have 0.00001% certainty.
The percents don't matter here. I have an experience of it. That's a justification. If you want to put a percent on it, doesn't make a difference. That justification, whatever percent it is sufficient.
Right. Well, I'm saying you have 0% certainty. You see
I don't need certainty here. So I don't care what percent you label on it. I see a TV. I experience a TV. That itself counts as justification for me. I don't care what number you put on it.
So how is that justification? So unpack that.
My brain is labeling the thing in front of me as a TV. I believe there is a TV in front of me.
Okay, so it's not about whether or not there actually is a TV there. It's about
right.
Your belief that there is a TV there.
Correct. So my justification is from an experience. My experience is purely in my head, and that experience leads to a belief, and the truth of the belief is completely independent of me altogether. So whether or not there is a TV is completely independent of me.
Which goes back to the cogito ergo sum.
What?
So that's within the foundation that you've given from the cogito ergo sum, right?
Probably, yes. Direct experience.
Yeah, so direct experience. I still see the problem of assuming a logic before you've established logic.
Well, so I've proved that false. So the fact that there are patterns in reality does not mean logic. So the fact that there are patterns in reality does not mean logic. Those are separate things.
Right. So again, let's drop the word logic. You're using the fact that there are patterns in reality to justify the fact that there are patterns within reality is what I am saying. That's my critique.
No, so I'm using the patterns that I experience to create a language to describe those patterns. But I'm not claiming the patterns are there. I don't care. It doesn't make a difference.
Right. So the patterns are just there for some reason. You can justify your language by which you describe those patterns because of those patterns, and then you can use that language to justify the existence of other patterns.
Sure.
So the tool by which you discern that there are patterns in reality.
The patterns are already known. So we already know there are patterns because we see them, and then we describe them.
Right, but the tool by which you see them, the tool by which you discern them.
My eyes.
Right. So you're assuming that tool in order to establish that tool.
Nope. So again, that's irrelevant here. I have an experience. I don't care how I got this experience. I don't care why. It doesn't matter what it is. I have an experience. There are differences. So I mean, I've already debunked you on this sufficiently. Like, this is very, very easy. Mine is clearly easy to understand. I have an experience. There are differences in the things I experience. Everyone shares this experience. It's pretty easy to understand. You don't have to know anything about yourself or your eyes or your brain or the world. You experience things. There are differences in those experiences, and you create a language.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you have to have any knowledge about anything, but you are claiming that there's something, some sort of tool of some sort by which you're able to detect that and say something describable about it.
Sure.
Which is itself the tool that you use to describe those things.
Sure. It's my
And so
brain. I
you're
don't
assuming
know
that
it yet.
you're assuming the tool to justify the tool.
No. So I haven't assumed the tool at all. Like I've never said brain at any point in my argument. I said I have an experience. There are differences in my experience. The brain would come in way later down the road.
I'm not saying the brain. You're assuming there's some tool to justify that there's some sort of tool.
My brain is the tool that I'm using to see these things.
Yeah, so now you're using brains. So now you're assuming a physical existence.
Right, way later down the argument. So I know that my brain exists. I know my brain is what is actually processing the things I see. I don't know this at the point of the argument. I don't need to. The starting point is just I experience and there are differences. And then once I know that, I can start labeling the differences. Oh, there's an arm, there's a leg, there are body parts and veins, and those veins carry blood, and those blood goes to the brain, and the brain has electrical signals.
But there has to be a tool already there by which you can differentiate those experiences.
That's the brain. So the brain is there. We already know it's the brain. Like I don't know it at this point of the argument, and I don't need to. It's irrelevant at this point in the argument.
Right, but this is the first step of justifying the existence.
No, it's not. This is not a step at all. This is your conclusion. This is not a step. There's never a step to start with everything in the world. The final answer is this. That's not a step. That's the conclusion. So the step is the experience. You have a phenomenon first, and then you try to get to the conclusion.
I just don't know how to say this any other way.
So again, I've assumed nothing about my brain here. I've never claimed I had a brain. We know I have a brain. We know that is the tool. We know the tool of my brain exists. I don't care in this argument. It doesn't make a difference. The only thing that matters is my experience. Whatever is causing that, presumably there is something. Doesn't matter what it is.
We're just gonna keep going over old ground because I'm seeing a problem. I don't think you're seeing it, and so we just keep saying the same things over and over again.
Yeah. Yes. You haven't explained any problem in what I've said. You said I'm using a tool to assume a tool. That is nonsense. Like yes, I'm using my brain to see things, obviously, but that doesn't matter to my argument. I never said brain. Brain was not a premise.
So there has to be some tool by which you.
By tool, do you mean brain? Because
I don't mean brain. You've just said that there's some kind of something that allows us to differentiate between. Right. It could be your brain. It could be your eyes. It could be there's something there.
Yes.
There's something by which you are.
The thinking. The thinking is the first thing.
Right, but you're using that tool. So your goal here is to arrive at a tool by which you can reason and process your reality.
Yeah, so it goes thinking, experience, language, logic. There's zero circularity in there. None of those are the same noun. Thinking, experience, language, logic. That's the pattern. It's literally not circular. It's a straight line.
So say that one more time.
Thinking, experience, language, logic.
Right. So if you're saying that there's a line that aren't different things, and you're no longer saying that it's a tautology. So thinking, which entails experience,
the language, I think, therefore I am, is a tautology. The sentence itself is irrelevant to the argument. It makes no difference. It's descriptive. It is irrelevant. Calling it a tautology does nothing. It's still the exact same thing. The existence and the pattern which you gain knowledge is irrelevant.
So our thinking our thinking and experience, existence, distinguishable from one another.
Our thinking and our experience are the same thing.
So it is a tautology.
No, they're synonyms. They mean the same thing. The thinking, I could say experience, then the thing. So it was like thinking, experience. Yeah, those two would be different. So the thinking and then what you're experiencing. That would be probably a better way to phrase it. Then you create a language. Then you create a logic.
Okay, a thinking and then what you're experiencing.
Yeah. The thinking is literally experience, but it's the things you're experiencing would be the second one.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I just don't know how to use any, because I from my perspective, I've adequately debunked this, and from your perspective, you've adequately debunked everything I've said.
Well, I still don't understand what you're saying is a debunking of this. So how is that circular? Thinking, experience, language, logic. Where is the circle? What premise is in the conclusion?
Yeah. So at it's the middle between each one of those things. So thinking, experience, reason, logic. Is that right?
Thinking, experience, language, logic.
Thinking, experience, language, logic. So the connector between each one of those things is logic, but you don't get to logic until the very last one.
So patterns exist. The logic is just the thing after the language. It's a complicated language. The patterns in reality exist independently of any of these things. So patterns in reality exist.
Right. And so I'm defining logic as those that the thing that causes those patterns in the first place, and you're defining logic as a language.
Right. The pattern itself is not logic. Logic itself does not exist. It is an abstract concept. There are things that exist, protons and neutrons. The fact that they exist is not logic.
Yeah. So I'm asking, how do you justify? How do you account for the fact that reality is in fact acting this way so that it is describable?
Again, I don't need to. It's irrelevant. It's not a part of the premises.
If it's not describable, then you can't end up at logic.
No, again, so that's not why I am seeing a camera and a TV. It does not matter. It's irrelevant. I am seeing a camera and a TV. Why is irrelevant?
If you can't describe it, you can't have a description.
Well, I just described it, camera and TV. So you asking why is reality such a way that I can describe it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. I know reality is such a way because I'm literally doing it right now in the present. I don't need to know why. It doesn't make a difference to the argument.
Right. So here's the thing. That it is describable could be completely illusory. In which case,
I'm still describing it. How could my description be illusory? How could my describing my own experience be an illusion?
Because the tools by which you formulate those descriptions could yield completely false beliefs.
Doesn't matter if the beliefs are false. Like I could say, I'm seeing a unicorn. That's still a true statement, even if the unicorn doesn't exist. So my describing my beliefs can't be false because I'm like, it's like saying J.K. Rowling's name of Harry Potter was wrong. Like, how could J.K. Rowling's name of Harry Potter be wrong?
Yeah, but you could experience a butterfly and process that you're experiencing a butterfly and then describe that as a book because it's completely illusory. It doesn't.
If I defined it that way, it's still true. So if I just defined it that way, that's my description. It's still true. It wouldn't be an inaccurate.
Right. No, I'm not just talking about semantics at this point. I'm talking about you. So the actual thing that we call a book and the actual thing that we call a butterfly, your tool, you have no means of discerning whether or not the tool.
So like I see a butterfly with my visual senses, and then as that information goes into my brain, it gets confused and is labeled as book.
Not just labeled as book, but becomes what we actually refer to as book.
So when I describe it, I say book. So I'm describing my experience. I see in my mental image, not literally my visual cortex sees a butterfly, but my mental image is book. And I describe it as a book. So I see a book is still true. It would still be true that I see a book and I am describing it as a book.
No. So you're actually experiencing the butterfly, and that becomes book in your description of it. So there's a discontinuity between your description and the thing you're experiencing. So if experience and language are not identifiable with one another, different steps in this, then there could be a break there, and you have no means of establishing the continuity between them.
So the continuity is literally my brain makes a connection. I see a TV, I see a camera. Now those connections could be wrong, but the connection my brain is making is still the connection my brain is making. So if I label something, if I give an experience a label, that label must be by definition true, because I'm saying I have this experience and I'm going to give this experience that label.
Yeah. So we're still saying different things. I still think you're not understanding what I'm saying.
I think I'm understanding what you're saying. It's like when I try to write down the word butterfly, I accidentally write down the word book or something like that. I'm thinking of a butterfly. I see a butterfly in my head, but when I try to write it down, it comes out as book or something like that.
No, I'm saying you're assuming there's some kind of necessary connection between experience and language. I'm saying you can't justify that.
Well, no, there's no necessary connection. I'm literally just making it up. I'm making up a language to describe my experience.
Yeah, but in order to make it up, and you saying it does even arbitrarily refer back to it, you're still assuming that there's an actual referent there by your language.
Yes, my mental
right?
image. So I have a mental image, and I'm making up a word to describe the mental image.
Right. So
But the mental image
there's
is not an assumption. There's no assumption of the mental image. I'm experiencing
I'm not saying you're assuming the mental image. I'm merely saying that you're assuming that the language can have any sort of referent to that, so that you can bring those two things together.
No, I'm not assuming that. I'm literally doing it. I say, this is a water bottle. I didn't assume that words can mean water bottle. I just did it.
I don't disagree that you're doing it. I'm disagreeing that you can account for doing it.
You don't need to. Again, you don't need to account for why I'm seeing the things I'm seeing. I start with, these are the things I'm seeing. You don't need to know why. It's irrelevant to the argument.
Yeah, but if you can't account for why, then you don't have an epistemology.
Yes, you do, because again, you don't need to account for why. Like if I say, I'm seeing a TV, I don't need to know why I'm seeing a TV.
Right. Well,
it's irrelevant.
let me rephrase. Not an epistemology that yields truth.
No, it could still yield truth, because if I said I'm seeing a TV and there is actually a TV there in reality, that's truth.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I have to rephrase. It yields justified true belief, knowledge. I said truth, I meant knowledge.
Same thing. So if I have an epistemology, I'm experiencing a TV, and that experience I use as a justification to any degree at all, and it happens to be true that there's a TV there, I now have a justified true belief.
Well, if it just happens to be true and it's not connected to the way you came to that belief,
well, of course not.
Then it's not
the
justified.
ontology is always independent of the epistemology, so it's never going to be connected to the way you came to the belief.
Yeah. So how can you still call it justification?
A justification doesn't need to be certain. Just anything that can make it more reasonable to believe X than Y is a justification.
More reasonable would be completely arbitrary if there's no connection between the truth maker and your belief.
The truth maker is reality.
Yeah, and so if the fact that there's a TV there in reality doesn't have any relation whatsoever to how you came to the belief, then the truth maker is disconnected from your experience of it, and you're not actually justifying it.
No, you can still be justified. So you can have false justification get to your problems. Like, it's totally fine. You don't need justification to be necessarily tied into reality itself. Like, I could phrase it this way. I could say, I believe I am seeing a TV. That statement would be true. That would be a justified true belief.
Okay, yeah. So then you're entirely within your mind still. So that's
still knowledge. That's still knowledge. So I can still have knowledge about God.
So that's within the cogito ergo sum based worldview which I don't think can yield anything outside of your own mind.
Well, that's fine. So I'm not. The only thing I need to show is that you can have knowledge without God, and I have knowledge without God.
Yeah, and so I'm still saying you can't, because there's still some kind of logic there that you're assuming. It's in the ergo.
No, again, so again, I've
already
debunked that. The therefore is just
So I don't think it's descriptive of something, though.
Yes,
what's
reality.
It descriptive of?
Reality. So I experience. That's a real thing. So the experience itself is a justification. I can say I'm seeing a TV, and therefore I have a belief I am seeing a TV. I now have a justified true belief. No reference to a God.
Yeah. Can we wrap this up at 9? Or I guess.
Yeah, we can wrap it up now. That's fine.
8 your time. Yeah, I just see us going in circles. Obviously we've come to the end of this. You see me as completely debunked. I don't see anything at all compelling about what you've said, though. So I guess, do you want to wrap up first? Or do you want me to wrap up first? I would like to give a wrap up statement.
Yeah, sure. So I've definitively proven that you can have knowledge without God. I've experienced TV. I believe I've experienced TV. I now have knowledge. I didn't reference a God in there one bit. So I've proven you can have knowledge without a God. And your worldview seems to, again, be no different from the drunk guy who claims to have revelation from Krishna or whatever from down the street. Like, you've shown no evidence to show that your ideology corresponds to reality. You provided no way to differentiate it from being imaginary, just like any other imaginary belief. And so there's no reason that anyone should accept it. And we should still just keep going with the science and the way that normal things do, because that does have a justification.
Okay, thank you. So the way I've seen it, we've gone down two paths, two major arguments in this debate. The one of them was whether or not I had any basis on my worldview for distinguishing whether or not the revelation I have from God is actually objective revelation or illusory. And so my worldview, I think I showed, was able to internalize that critique and respond to it on its own ground, and show that it's not a problem for us, because that changes the ontology. It becomes a completely different worldview. We can critique that worldview as failing, not yielding knowledge, but we know we have knowledge, and so God must be the case. It's the transcendental argument. It just becomes a different worldview that we can run the transcendental argument against, and still come to God by demonstration of the impossibility of the contrary. So that's a contrary to Christianity. It's not Christianity. Therefore, it's impossible. Therefore, it doesn't yield knowledge. Therefore, Christianity must be true, because we do have knowledge, and Christianity on its own grounds can yield knowledge. The second one was the cogito ergo sum. This is the other major argument we went over. We were not able to reach any sort of accord on this, which I think is unfortunate. But I guess I didn't expect anything different. That we would just come to an impasse. I see that there is these steps that Tom has provided for us. Experience, thinking, experience, language, and then logic. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So they're not just arbitrarily existing independent of one another. He's connecting them somehow. And I don't think he's been able to account for his ability to connect them. The logic that he ends up at would connect them. But if that's going to be the connector, and that's the conclusion of those steps, then it becomes logically fallacious, ultimately circular, viciously circular, self-defeating. Knowledge is impossible on that basis, because it's just an arbitrary imposition of knowledge earlier in the syllogism before he's arrived at the conclusion. And so I don't think he's provided any worldview which on its own grounds can yield knowledge. And if the transcendental argument is a valid argument, then it's still in competition with this cogito ergo sum based worldview that TJump has presented. The Christian worldview must still necessarily be true. And yeah, I had this criticized your position, TJump. So I always like to be considerate. If you want to get a last word in there, if you feel like you've done what you've had to already, then go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've shown conclusively that the cogito is definitively, without any shadow of a doubt, a better grounds of knowledge. So I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any questions from the audience that we can field?
Chat. Where's the chat?
Or if you want to get going, that's okay too.
I think there was like 3 or 4 super chats earlier on, mostly comments and subs. I don't know if there are any questions. For questions, it'd be better to go on Discord. They have, with the audience there, Scotty can run the questions, but I don't see any right now.
Okay. Do you want to go into Discord and field questions, or again, I can be done at any point as well. Wherever you want to be done.
Yeah, we should next time do it in Discord. That's where the questions will be. So
Okay.
I'll just
So
head out.
are you saying you do want to do it again, or?
Sure. We can set one up with you and the other guys in the Discord too.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to, I'm game for that.
Cool. All
So
right. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate talking with you.
yep. Thank you. Yeah,
See,
I appreciate it as well. I appreciate that we were able to, be civil, and even though we really strongly disagreed with one another. So
yep.
yeah.
See you later.
To